So, do you ever feel like no matter how hard you work at your job or how many hours you put in, that it never really pays off when it comes to home ownership because of the fact that the average cost of a house in the US is far higher than the average salary? How do you expect people to afford homes in a society where the average salary is anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 a year? And Gen Z, and specifically I'm talking about Gen Z, but this doesn't just apply to Gen Z because even people of older generations, like if you're looking into purchasing a home right now, you can't afford to pay all that money out of pocket because it's ridiculous. Nobody can afford to pay $400,000 to $500,000 out of pocket for a house when they're only making $30,000 to $60,000 a year from their job or jobs, because in today's economy, this terrible economy that we're living in, it's normal nowadays for people to just have 2 to 3 jobs, and somehow we're supposed to believe that that's you know, perfectly fine, or that should be the standard, right? And even then, when you're still working those 2 to 3 jobs, you still can't afford a house. We were told all these years of our lives, go to school, get a job, all of this, right? And you'll be able to live the American dream. Go to college and, get a degree and everything like that. And nowadays, you're not even guaranteed, even if you do, go to college and get even a solid paying job, you're still not going to be able to afford to pay for a house out of pocket because, like I said, the cost is way higher than the average salary. Nobody's affording that. You'd have to be literally like in upper class status of income to be able to afford a ridiculous amount of money like that out of pocket. That's why everybody does mortgages. Nobody can afford that. It's insane. And the reason why I'm specifically putting an emphasis on Gen Z is because, this is the age group of men and women that, they're in school, they're trying to get their degree, for whatever they're studying, right? They're trying to get a career going for themselves. And I just feel bad for them because technically, I'm a part of that group too, of course, obviously. But it's just terrible because, they're trying to get into their careers and everything, and they have to deal with a market that's so ridiculously unaffordable. A market where the average cost of a house is astronomically higher than what they're ever going to get paid from their job. And that's why I'm specifically putting an emphasis on Gen Z because, they're in the process of trying to get a career going for themselves and everything. But this is the big, barrier that they're facing, right? The housing crisis is terrible. And even if you do take the mortgage route, that's still debt that you have to pay back over time. So it's really a lose-lose situation for people. And meanwhile, we're being gaslit into believing that the economy's doing really good right now. We got clown leaders telling us, the job market's getting better and the housing market's recovering and all this nonsense. But I guarantee you, if you ask the average person how they're doing right now in terms of finances, in terms of being able to just live an enjoyable life that's not where you're not constantly stressing about whether you're going to be able to afford your mortgage, your rent, regardless, your electricity, your all of your bills, because there's so many bills that you have to pay on a monthly basis. You got housing, that's the biggest thing. You got housing, you got electricity, you got auto insurance, you got groceries, you got so many different things. And it all adds up over time. And the average person is not making enough to where they can actually live an enjoyable life where they're not constantly stressing about it. So, yeah, as you guys can see by the title, my main point is that home ownership is really impossible for Gen Z. It's a literal impossibility, because how do you expect people to afford a ridiculous house that costs way more than what their average salary even is? And then they have to pay off bills every single month, right? All of these bills on a monthly basis, which is actually what's eating away at most of their income. So how do you expect Gen Z to afford a house? They can't. It's objectively impossible. And like I said, it's not just Gen Z. It's for anybody that's trying to purchase a home. The average person can't afford the house out of pocket because it's too much. And let's not forget student loan debt. Another big issue in today's world is student loan debt. That in itself is going to make it even more difficult for people to afford homes, because not only they have to already pay off their bills, for their basic needs, but they have to pay back the student loans. They got to worry about that now, right? That's another added barrier on top of the already, ridiculous amounts of financial stress that people are dealing with. They have to worry about that. They have to worry about stagnant poverty wages that are not keeping up with the cost of living. They have to just worry about everything. They just have to keep worrying about it. How am I going to afford rent? How am I going to have the American dream? How am I going to afford to have the American dream when I can't even make not even a quarter of the average cost of a home every year? I'm not even making that much every year, not even a quarter of the average cost of a home. This is how bad it is. Even people working 2 to 3 jobs are not even making close to enough. And we're supposed to believe, the economy's doing good. No, it's not. Anybody telling you that is either trying to rage bait you or purposely being delusional, because it's not even close. And then you got homelessness crisis skyrocketing over time as well. It's only going to get worse. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'm not going to do any of that pretend nonsense. I'm going to just tell you straight up like it is. It's only going to get worse. And that is by design. It is by design, and it's in our faces. It's been in our faces for several years now. This is all by design. Every single bit of it. And the thing is, what do you expect people to do, People are doing everything they can, working 2 to 3 jobs. I remember those days when it used to be normal for people to afford their basic needs with just one job. But nowadays, people are working 2 to 3 jobs just to keep up. Or actually, just to barely keep up. Let me make that clear. Just to barely keep up, because they're barely keeping up as it is. That's why they have to do the 2 to 3 jobs, because one job nowadays doesn't cut it anymore. Because those days of being able to, just have one job that you can rely on and afford all your expenses and everything, your bills, just with that one job, those days are long gone. Long gone. And they're never coming back. Those days are never coming back again. And eventually, I was saying this on my other channels as well, before they got shadow banned. But eventually, we're going to end up seeing hyperinflation. And that's when the real struggle is going to kick in, because it's already bad right now. But when hyperinflation kicks in eventually, I don't know when it's going to be. But when that happens, it's going to be a whole different level of struggling and suffering. It's not even funny. It's just a nightmare, everything in this economy. And whether it's the housing market, the job market, the homelessness, just everything. The poverty wage is not keeping up with the ridiculous cost of living. Every single every single angle you look at the economy right now, to anybody that's paying attention and not just, blindly believing people like Donald Trump, who literally just lies to you every single day, you know that this economy is not great. You know that when you're living in a society where the average person doesn't even make a quarter of what the average cost of a home is every year, you know you're living in a terrible economy. People aren't even making close to the amount that it costs. But we're supposed to believe the economy's doing great. We're supposed to believe that everything's getting better. We're supposed to believe that we're being told the truth by these clowns that are blatantly lying to us about the economy supposedly getting better. It's a joke. And then you have a rise of people leaving the country because people are realizing that it's not really sustainable to live in the US anymore. This system that we're living in is like a never-ending cycle of like a hamster wheel that just never stops. That's the best way I can describe the way this system is designed. There's nothing normal about people having to work multiple jobs just to still barely even be able to keep up with the cost of living. There's nothing normal about that. And that actually in itself is enough proof to show you that this economy is actually in a terrible state. Just that point alone, I keep saying it over and over because it's important that people don't forget that, because that in itself is enough crystal clear proof that this economy is in a terrible position right now. Terrible state.